The South Carolina woman who fought development pressures to save her family's land has died. Josephine Wright died on January 7th at the age of 94. Welcome to the latest word on Black News. I'm your host, Brittany Jones. She was in a legal battle with developers in Hilton Head who claimed her back porch encroached on their land. Now, Wright's plight gained national attention and support from celebrity A-listers, including Tyler Perry, who vowed to build her a new home. Land battles, though, including incidents of racism and discriminatory practices, have plagued the Black community throughout history. And still, there are so many people who have to face this battle alone.
And that's a part of the problem, is we need to have more laws that are aligned with the ethics here so that we do have more protection from these types of legal but unethical practices.
Our guest today, Sunn M'Cheaux, Gullah language instructor at Harvard University and Gullah Geechee native, helps us unpack this critical topic, providing solutions to preserve land for future generations.
So first of all, what's your reaction to that story in particular?
That story, I wish it was more uncommon. I wish it was more of an anomaly than what it actually was, because I grew up hearing stories just like that. I still currently hear stories a lot like that. And even in my own family, we've experienced stories somewhat like that, minus the A-list celebrities and the donations and everything, but the plight of trying to hold on to your land, and also the many circumstances under which a person can lose their property. That's something that we grew up with, and we just not necessarily become accustomed to, as in become numb to it, but you've seen it, you've heard it before, and so that's a part of a major effort of Gullah Geechee people. It's a part of your cultural upbringing. If you're a landowner, it's a part of your cultural upbringing. There are certain things like traditions, food ways, and arts and things like that, along with those lessons and things that are integral to your Gullah Geechee culture, is learning how to be a proper steward for the land and how to hold on to it.
Mm-hmm. And as you mentioned, this is not new, and unfortunately, like you said, it's always going on in the background. But there are certain stories that begin to get national attention, but it also renews the conversation that needs to be had about what is happening. So, for the people who don't really know much about the Gullah Geechee culture, talk about your family's history and a little bit about what that is.
As it pertains to land ownership, with the Gullah Geechee people, it's not necessarily unique to Gullah Geechee people, but a part of it is integral to the growth of the Gullah Geechee community from its inception, which dating back to, for those who aren't familiar with, who the Gullah Geechee people are historically, we hail mostly from West Africa, mostly, not exclusively, but mostly from West Africa, where our people were abducted for special sets of skills that they already had, although Rick DeSantis would argue that we got our skills from slavery. That's not true. We were enslaved because we already had those skills. People who were growing rice and West Africans were growing rice and other crops that, and indigo, that made it profitable to have us here in the Low Country and throughout the Caribbean. Well, Gullah Geechee people are the people who, due to isolation, due to sets of social circumstances after the war, had enough space and distance and buffer between ourselves and outsiders to be able to preserve a larger portion of our Africanness and our traditions and foodways than say people outside of those regions where we were forced to assimilate. And so with Gullah Geechee people, the land became a big part of it for two essential reasons. Number one being, they were the Maroons. They were the Gullah Geechee people who were, collaborated with and taken in by with indigenous people. You'll see that with the Florida Seminoles, people who fought in the Gullah Wars and engaged in guerrilla warfare. And a lot of the settlements that were due to the indigenous peoples were also due to our people as well, because that is how those tribes came into fruition, was with our ancestors and theirs. And so there were settlements. Unfortunately, the U.S. government did not honor all of those agreements. And even more unfortunately, not all of the tribes honored those agreements either. And so our Gullah Geechee ancestors ended up migrating, even further west, to Mexico, parts of Texas, and establishing homesteads in those places where slavery had been, outlawed, and establishing communities there. Now that's one set of Gullah Geechee people. Then there are those who stayed in the region, which is the Gullah Geechee Cultural Heritage Corridor. Now, that is officially extends from about Wilmington, North Carolina, inland 35 miles, and down the coast to about Jacksonville, Florida. Now, that region is called the Gullah Geechee Cultural Heritage Corridor. And that's where many of the Gullah Geechee people were centralized, like where we lived. After the war, we've heard the 40 acres and a mule thing, but after the war, when many of the property and the farms and things were taken over, we were allocated certain amounts of land to work. Black farmers, Black families were allocated certain amounts of land to work, particularly those of us who fought in the war against, the South. And for a period of time, particularly Reconstruction, there was a boom of Black and Gullah Geechee people being able to work the land and make strides as landowners. People will ask, well, how could your family possibly have had a stake in the land since the 1850s if the Emancipation Proclamation and the war and everything didn't happen until 1865? Well, again, it depends on what people are thinking in terms of like land ownership. There's handshake. There's what is given to you by word of mouth, by given to you to a spit in the palm handshake, gentleman's agreement, and then there's what can be documented. There were lands allocated to people before documentation could make it official. And for some of those people, many of these people, and this is going to segue into what's really become a problem, is for many people, there was no contract. It was continued to be a word of mouth agreement that turned into what we now call heirs property, where, Big Mama or Granddaddy or whatever, just give it to these their children with the understanding that they're going to divide it a particular way, and then they give it to their children with an understanding that you keep it in the family, and everyone just kind of has this understanding. But as modernity kicks in and gentrification, is barking at the gate, those people are looking for official documentation. How do we know that this belongs to you and how long it's belonged to you? They're looking for official documentation, and having it agreed upon in the family Bible, handwritten, 60, 70, 100 years ago, isn't always going to suffice. And even if you can get to that point where it is honored as an agreement, the issue with heirs property is that because we are all essentially acting as a co-op, without a clear title, which fortunately my family is, under one umbrella, passed on land through clear titles. So we didn't necessarily have to deal with the heirs property issue because we had the foresight to get clear titles for the property in order to be able to pass it down. But for those who do not, all it takes is one person to want to sell to basically uproot the other family members, because you now have to buy that person out at market value. And if you don't have the money to buy that person out at market value, which in many cases they do not, then the property ends up being sold and the money being split, which depending on the value of the property and the number of people that it's being divided by, may not at all be worth selling it, and also certainly might not even be enough for you to replace what was lost. Not the amount of land, not the family history, not another home. We know the real estate market is really aggressive right now and expensive.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, if you have a piece of property that sells for $100,000, but you're splitting it between 10 people, you're not going to be able to get $100,000 property in its place because you simply don't have that. And so that's a part of the thing with the Gullah Geechee culture is the land ownership issue is complicated in the sense that we know that there were indigenous people who were here, who, in many instances, the native, who were, genocided by, colonizers. We know that. We know that their lands were taken and treaties were broken. We know that as well. We also know that there were some indigenous tribes who also participated in enslavement of Africans, the so-called 5 civilized tribes engaged in that. And so when we start talking about, okay, well, shouldn't the Gullah Geechee people give back the land to the indigenous, people? Okay, well, which indigenous, don't those people owe the Gullah Geechee people, reparations as well as the colonizers? Like, it just becomes a complicated mess. But it is something that has been integral to our culture is preserving and holding on to the land. And that becomes more complicated when you put a Starbucks adjacent to a property that's considered virgin land, where it's undeveloped. That property, 2 things happen. The Starbucks property can not, fulfill its potential in regards of its value if it's just kind of, orphaned there in the middle of nowhere, which it ain't gonna be orphaned there in the middle of nowhere. Like once they put something like that in there, you already know what's next.
The build-up comes. Mm-hmm.
Right. And then the property value goes up. So if you have a grandmother, 90-something-year-old grandmother who's been paying her property taxes for, $430 on her land for the past 50 years, and now all of a sudden there's a highway, there's a TJ Maxx, a mall, a Starbucks and a Dunkin' Donuts or whatever across from her place. And now the land taxes are $2,000, $1,800, $1,300. Now the land taxes for someone on a fixed income, they can't afford what they could afford before, even though it's the same property. And when they start playing that game about looking up old property lines and having a road come right at your back door, and then you have to give them an easement for a throughway, and that easement goes over on your property X amount of feet, and so you have to cut your porch in half. So all these little games that they play to manipulate people to litigate them out of their homes aren't very unusual. It's more common than uncommon, and it's perfectly legal. It's unethical, but it's not illegal. And that's a part of the problem, is we need to have more laws that are aligned with the ethics here, so that we do have more protection from these types of legal but unethical practices.
And I love how you put that. You said it's right now currently legal but unethical. So how do we fix that? What has your family done to help protect your land? And then what are some efforts that you think need to be made across the board so that these things don't continue to happen?
Well, I think one of the first things, if you always have to start in-house. With anything, you start in-house. The first thing you will want to do is you will want to start by teaching your family members the importance of the land, the significance, the history of it, by having them, camp on it, fish on it, hunt on it, pick berries on it, farm on it. Have it play an integral part of their lives as they grow into it. Because as they get older, they're going to find lives of their own. They're going to want to do things of their own. They're going to want to get a house of their own, a place of their own, do things on their own. And if they haven't gotten, their sentimental roots, like really dug into that land, and then when the people who were the stewards of it pass away, then it becomes just a tax bill. It's not really like their home as much as it is a tax bill. And you have to ask yourself, like, well, why am I in New Jersey? or Long Beach or wherever I am in Kansas, still paying a portion of a tax bill on some property in, Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, where I don't even live. And at some point, it just becomes a question of either you're going to sign it over to a family member, just do the right thing and sign it over for $5 of love and affection, or some people might be like, you know what, word on the street is this property is worth XYZ, and they greed kicks in. So you just hope that you've established enough of a relationship and with the land first and foremost for them to care enough about it to educate themselves on the land, and go to some of these city council meetings, join some of the city councils, and like do what you can to be educated about not only the land as it pertains to your sentimental aspect of it, but legal. Like, what are your options legally? What can you do? Sometimes eminent domain will come along, and people don't know how to protect themselves from eminent domain when the city just decides it needs your land or a portion of it for whatever the reason be, and they're going to give you what they believe is a fair number for that. Sometimes people lose their land because there's an HOA that's moved in adjacent to them, and they kind of start flexing their authority, and they don't realize that the HOA doesn't have any authority over them. Like, you live in the county, you tell those people to go fly a kite. There's nothing they can do about it. And so it's knowing, it's the knowledge first and foremost. Like, start with the knowledge and the love for the land. From there, you really have to be aggressive and be assertive in your knowledge and protection of the land. Tangible things, not just having it in your heart, but I mean, like, literally looking for the information, looking for the bylaws, knowing what you can and can't do. Situations where if there's a dispute with an adjacent, property, situations like I think I did a post where I was talking about people build the fence by our trees and then ask us to cut the trees to accommodate their fence that they built next to the trees. Like, nah, that's not happening. Mm-hmm. But you also need to make sure that your trees aren't damaging the fence. Like, there's still things that you have to do on your end to make sure that you don't get set up to be, taken down. So that's what it is: knowledge, rapport, relationship. And also, I said that the relationship with the land matters, and it does, but you can't discount relationships with one another. I know that, particularly with Black people, we don't like to think in terms of afterlife preparation. There are people walking around without a will because they think that they're, creating a will jinx them. Like, they're still
and I want to
superstitious.
stop you there on that point really quick too. Just to read this number, it says a 2023 Wills and Estate Planning survey by Caring.com found that only 29% of Black people have a will compared to 39% of white Americans. This is what you're talking about right now. So I want you to continue that because, just looking at that stat.
Right. I mean, we've seen situations like this in particularly religious areas, and when there's an intersection of religion and less formal education about these matters. A lot of times this is what happens, where people are superstitious and don't, and they feel like it will put bad mouth on them, to have to talk about their death. And then also there's sometimes familial dysfunction to the point where nobody wants to say to a person who's alive and looking in their face, "I'm not leaving you anything." or I'm gonna give this to your brother, and I'm giving you the truck and then the land. Like, I'll take the land, then let them have the truck. Like, they don't, a lot of times they don't want to do that. So they leave the dirty work and the heavy lifting to someone after them when they're gone. And so what you've done is you've left a rift behind that's going to undermine the ability to be proper stewards of the land. Like, you're going to have this JR Bobby Ewing dynamic, like Dallas, where they're kind of going at one another, and And so what you really have to do is make sure that your actual relationships are as non-toxic and supportive as possible, because ultimately you're not just family members, you're board members, you're business partners. So at some point you can't keep leaving land person to person. You will have to create a trust with members, and with bylaws and things like that, maybe something even being incorporated in to have an entity, not just a person, because we never know when cousin Pookie might might just wild out and run off to go do whatever. Hey, listen, people break bad sometimes, and you never know. And anything can happen, and they can throw a monkey wrench in the whole situation, and you need to be able to stop that. I know of situations where family members, sometimes it might be one or two, even one family member might be the single person who's the most responsible for the most property being lost, because they can't seem to hold on to, whether it's non-payment of taxes or sales that were not approved of by the family member. You end up with a big donut hole in the middle of your family property. And once that happens, everyone else is vulnerable. And that's why you say, oh man, we should have had something in place to serve as a buffer or firewall between a family member just simply getting rid of the property without anyone else knowing it or having the first right of refusal before that happens. And I want to be clear that in as much as I do talk about the predatory developers, we know that race can sometimes be a factor as well. Class can be a factor. I guess I want to emphasize the importance of solidarity amongst the family first and foremost, above and beyond all of that. Sometimes you might have a family member who's doing very well and another family member who's not doing very well. And when it's time to take care of the responsibilities for the land, if what you have is one person has their share, but they haven't been doing too well financially, and the other person has their share, and they have been, well, the person who's too ashamed to ask for money or to admit how bad things have been, you find out they lost their land when somebody else puts a realtor sign up in it, or you find out they haven't paid their taxes when there's a ribbon around a tree on their property because they didn't say anything. And so what ends up happening is the person who's doing well doesn't have the opportunity to swoop in and say, hey, let me help you out so we can make sure this thing doesn't leave the family. It's chaotic when they're not acting as a single unit. Even if you have multiple clear titles where everyone is entitled to their own property, you still want to try to move as a unit, because the fate of one property influences the fate of the other. If in the event that one person decides that they're going to have a pig farm on their property and they're going to have pig waste going into the water supply right next to someone else's property, that's going to affect the property value. That's going to affect a lot of options of what you can do or what you would even want to do on your adjacent property. And so if you don't want them to do that, then you have to start thinking in terms of other ways that we can generate revenue for them to not have to do it, instead of just saying, no, you can't do what you want to do on your own property. That's not how it works. So as you can see, there are lots of complicated conversations that need to be had in great detail, and tempers can fly, passions can flare. And that's why having a bedrock of a strong as possible, positive, supportive relationship with one another is so important, so that you don't have a developer who's able to just kind of slide in through the back door, give an offer to this person, and then use that to undermine everyone else. I mean, you hope that doesn't happen, but human nature is a fickle thing.
Any word of advice for future generations? We know obviously keeping land within our communities is kind of the means to building that generational wealth. So any
Right.
advice that you have specific to that, to kind of educate the people on what they need to do if they do have this land, or maybe they don't know they have it but need to look into it?
I would go back to first and foremost, if it's multiple people, put your heads together. Try to create, things such as like keeping documentation. If you have documentation that's important to the land, share the documentation. Like everyone should have access to it. Who's going to have a hand in it? Instead of if something happens to you, now we digging all through your house and through shoe boxes and mattresses and come on, don't do that. Don't do
Hmm.
that. Um, Deal with it. Remember that you're not just family. You're dealing with an entity that is absolutely valuable to the municipality where it is. Like, trust me, there are going to be people sending you offers in the mail. They are trying to get it for a reason. It is absolutely valuable. Sometimes you're sitting on a gold mine. Sometimes you're literally sitting on a gold mine. But you want to approach it from a business perspective, and the whole business never personal thing doesn't apply when it's family. So you have to think in terms of the foundation, starting with a firm foundation as much as possible, making sure that you taking care of people here, and then work your way up to here, and don't forget here. Making sure that that's taken care of, and then going about the business of being stewards of the land. Don't think of yourself as a landowner. Think of yourself as a steward. Like it's not your land; it's just your turn. And until for good, it's
Hmm.
just your turn. But you have to start mentoring in the family. Have an heir, and it can't just be because they're blood. Blood's not enough. You can have an heir who is irresponsible and not someone that you would leave something that important to, but they are all you got. Well, in that case, then you need to create a trust so that this person, you can protect them from themselves, protect them from their own ineptitude if need be, even from the grave, posthumously to look out for the family. So you want to make sure that you do that. Now I have a sibling who does that. They will talk to their kids. They will bring them on the land. They will have them cut the grass. They will have them hunt and do things and camp, and make sure that they have sentimental attachment to it. Come over, to visit the family. Teach them about it. Teach them about how to maintain it, where to go pay the taxes, and just basically training them to one day be in their shoes. And that's what you have to do. You have to make sure that you are setting it up, because life comes at you fast, but death comes at you faster. And so it's one of those things where you want to make sure that you're prepared for the unexpected, and you do that with some level of foresight. So in a nutshell, that would be my thing: is first of all, take care of your family bonds, your family ties. Don't let old grudges carry over, and and infect your relationships. You need that, to do the work that's necessary, and then also do the business that's necessary, and let everybody got different gifts. If somebody else's gift might be paperwork, your gift might be landscaping. Let to each their, let them do whatever their gift may be, and hold each of those things in equal value, so that nobody feels less than. So you take care of that. And then also the third thing would be, beyond handling the business, is making sure that you have an heir apparent, that you have mentors, that you have been that you are mentors, and you have mentees, that you've been doing the things necessary with your generation, whether it's your nieces, your nephews, your children. You have been working them into the system and giving them the knowledge necessary, so that after you, they can carry on the work. And if you take a look at a lot of the situations where people are getting their land taken outside of just as predatory practices, by developers and municipalities, there are some times when land ownership just implodes. I know some gentlemen right now, who are in the golden stages of their lives, and their kids just aren't interested in living in the country. They're just not interested in the land. They're living in the city. They've moved on with life. And I'm like, what's going to happen to all of this property when you're gone? Like, I mean, and they're like, all I can do is just keep trying to talk to them and work on them and try to get them here. Like they, you know, some of them said that they might make it into an Airbnb or whatever. And I'm like, man, that's a lot. That's a lot to process. But, you know, hindsight is 2020. They recognize that there were many years and many opportunities that were missed to have them feel connected to the land in a way that they would, you know, return home when it was their turn.
Mm. And I wanted to ask you too before I let you go, because I know I'm over the time here, but I wanted to ask about the videos. You do a lot of informational videos and kind of walking people through while you're on
Mhm.
land, and all those things. What inspired you to do that, and what are you hoping that people will be able to take away from that?
A couple things inspired me to do it. I because I wanted two things. I wanted there to be different looks, other than just us constantly um, getting our land taken from us. Like we needed other stories alongside the heirs property stories, alongside the people getting edged off of their property. We also needed stories of people being able to hold on to it. We also needed stories of people showcasing what they love about it. A lot of times, if there's not a lot of construction on the property, people look at that as a waste of space. They want to see houses, streets, you know, cul-de-sacs, stores, street lights, and if they don't see that, they're like, oh, but this is all going to waste. But there's that space is teeming with plant life and animal life and all these other things. So when you show, now these are the things that are here, even in absence of all those things that y'all think are what makes a land valuable. Let me show you how you can use this for natural deterrent for mosquitoes, or you can use this for a stomach ache. You can use this right here for these things. You can make, some kind of dessert out of this right here. Like all these different things that you can do. I wanted to represent that as well, but also to show that the relationship between the people and the land. Like people, we're not just sitting on a plot of land. And I think that's something that a lot of people can't really relate to, because who live in subdivisions or who live in places where they either rent or don't have a stake in the property that they live on in the same way that we do. So on the outside looking in, I'll hear a lot of them say, well, why not just move? Or just take the money and go, like, just buy some more land somewhere else. Like they don't have the same, it's not the same. And
Mm-hmm.
so I do it so that they can understand what it's about, like why we care so much, why it matters so much, what's the beauty of the land and the value of the land beyond its monetary value. And also, I think it's also just a light flex for racists and bigots who pray for us to lose it, who want us to lose it. And some of those comments sections, there are people who are saying that they wish that I'll get lynched on my land. I said they want me to be hung on my land.
Wow.
They'll say some of the most vile and vulgar things that you can imagine about a land ownership video. Like there's nothing controversial. It's a land ownership video made you say you wish the landowner got lynched on their property. So that's the element that you're dealing with. That's how they feel about us being owners and stewards of this land. That's the type of energy that's out there. That's the energy that will be voting for your rights, will be voting for your privileges, be voting for, how you're able to progress as a person. Once you get to that end county maintenance sign in your yard and you're responsible for everything from that point forward, there's a lot of people who simply envy that. They don't like that because we're not supposed to own property. In their minds, we're supposed to be property. And so I do that for the culture as well, to let people know that, we're here. We're not going anywhere, and they can just cry about it.
Yes. Well, Sunn M'Cheaux, it has been amazing to have you talk to me about this, because it's very informative. So many people need to know this information, and I definitely want to have you back.
Awesome. Anytime. I appreciate the invitation. I enjoyed the conversation as well. Anytime.
Many thanks to Sunn M'Cheaux for dropping some absolute knowledge for us on land ownership. The Equal Justice Initiative reports Black people have lost at least 12 million acres of land just in the South alone. So we know we need those tools to continue to fight this ongoing battle, folks. Well, this wraps up our pilot season of the latest word on Black News. So if you made an appearance on our show, we want to say thank you so much. And until next time, I'm your host, Brittany Jones. Take care.